Hey guys, Calandros here. Um, so I had mentioned in my update video yesterday about doing a video for Jason Becker, um, Jason Becker's Altitudes, but the version it's like a guitar playthrough basically, but it's by this young French girl, and her name is Tina S. You can follow her on YouTube. Just search Tina S. She did a bunch of different covers, like she did Dragon Force and Through the Fire and the Flames, and um, you know she did Moonlight Sonata, the Dr. Vyasi version, which is insane. Um, Probably actually even harder than this, which is saying something. Um, but she kind of dropped off of YouTube about a year and a half ago. So she, I suspect, I don't know for certain, but I think it was really that she was concerned about the level of attention that she was getting, because there was some pretty gross comments and stuff in YouTube and even on her Twitter and stuff like that. And like I said, she's just a young girl. She was only 16 at the time. She's 19 now, I think. And I don't think it was because she got a job in a band or something like that. I think it was just because of the just like the creep factor that you can get sometimes with some of these female guitar players on Twitch. Um, but but yeah, my friend that passed away, he loved these videos. He loved these kinds of videos because it just showed how ridiculously talented there are, like some of these people on YouTube are. Like, I mean, for this girl to be as young as she is, and we'll get into it and when I do the breakdown. But I mean, the level of maturity that's shown in her playing is, it's unbelievable. And and some of these other, like the group of kids that played 46 and 2 by Tool, from the kids from the O'Keefe Music Foundation. They're like, those kids too are unbelievable, and they're even younger than Tina is. They're like from age 10 to like 14. So it's unbelievable, some of the stuff that's out there. So yeah, I don't want to talk too much. I'll get right into the video, but this is for my friend CrankyCanuck. Doing the video on this one. Let's see if I can get this thing. There we go. And okay. All right, here we go. All right. Let me bring up my notes here. Um, so, just a little background on before we get into the actual breakdown of the song. Um, and the young lady that you saw, Tina S. That's her what she goes by on YouTube. Like I said, she was only 16 at the time that this video was recorded. And as for the song itself, Jason was diagnosed with, and if you've never heard of Jason Becker, you really seriously need to at least check out his story, because it's on one hand one of the saddest stories, but also one of the most inspirational and amazing stories in music. He was This album came out in 1988. In 1990, he was hired to replace Steve Vai as David Lee Roth's guitarist, and simultaneously was working on his second album. And in 1990, late 1990, he was diagnosed with ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease. So, for those of you who don't know what that does, it causes paralysis. It eventually causes near complete paralysis in your body, and you know, it's basically a death sentence. So they told him he had 3 to 5 years to live. That was, like I said, in 1990. It is now 2018, and he's still alive. And he's written 2 albums. But he finished the album he was working on in 1991, and it had all of his. He actually recorded the guitars on that album. That was released in '96, and Eddie Van Halen got a major label release for him on I forget which record label. I think it was Warner Brothers, but he recorded 2 albums, and I mean at that point he had been lost almost complete control over most of his extremities, and and then by, I'm not sure at what point, probably by around 95, he was probably almost completely paralyzed. Like I said, they had only given him 5 years to live. But through what I'm sure is very intensive home care and everything, he has gotten slightly better. He has some control over his facial muscles, and he can move his eyes. And so his father wrote a program to chart eye movement, so he can speak, without words, and write music without words. And he wrote 2 albums, with using his eyes, and he has a new album that is coming out this year. In a very short period of time, last week they released the first single, and there's 13 of the probably the biggest names in guitar are on that album. I mean, Jeff Loomis, pretty much like anybody big. Steve Vai is on there. Pretty much anyone big, you name it, they're on there. Satriani is on there. They're all there because Jason is just a very, very special guy, and his story is it's unbelievable. There's really not. I mean, when you look at the the indomitable will of the human spirit. I don't think there's a better example than Jason Becker. Um, and so that's the story behind this album, the song, and why Jason is so important to me. Um, Now, as for why this song grabbed Cranky, I don't really know. He's not necessarily a metal guy. He liked Rush and stuff like that. He was more of a prog rock and classic rock kind of guy. Um, but I think for him it was just the awesomeness of seeing something so incredibly difficult being played by this this young lady. And there's really not a ton of female guitarists out there. It's sort of like a kind of a, unfortunately, a man's world. As a lot of people look at it as like a man's world out there. And really now we're starting to see a lot more female guitarists, female bass players, female drummers. There's a ton of female singers out there. As much as you may or may not like Evanescence, I think that for that to have become mainstream is largely and thanks to them, because there were bands. I mean, they were not the first. I mean, Lacuna Coil was around before Evanescence was, but they really made it mainstream to have the female fronted rock or hard rock or metal band, right? So, whatever you may think about Evanescence as a band, um, you know, I think that was huge. And when we look at bands like Unleash the Archers, which I didn't want to forget, but shout out to Kit. I don't know if you're watching, Kit, but thank you so much. This is a signed postcard from their show, um, and signed by their front woman, Brittany Slays. So, anyways, moving into the song, the amazing thing to me about Tina's playing on this song is that despite how incredibly difficult the song is, like I mean, I've been playing guitar for a long time. I can't even come close to playing something this difficult. I have just a difficult enough time trying to master a very basic, moderate speed sweep picking run, to say nothing of the ridiculous stuff that's in this song. Um, but despite all of that, despite how difficult this song is and how technical it is, it's a very emotive song. It's got a ton of emotion in it, which I always get really mad when I see criticism leveled at some of these really great guitar players, saying that they just are shredding and they don't have any feeling behind what they're playing, and people use, probably unfairly, in my opinion, and I'm sure they would probably even agree. Guys like David Gilmour are used as like this sledgehammer to beat people who have a high level of technical ability, to say, oh, um, this guy from Pink Floyd is one of the greatest of all time, and is not some crazy technical player. Just because you can play an instrument to an extremely high level does not mean that you don't have any feeling behind what you're playing. And I think this song is one of the greatest examples of that. There's others on this album. This is one of the greatest ones. There's two other ones that I think really stand out. One is Air, which is a nod to Bach, who wrote a classical piece called Air. And that was sort of Jason's inspiration for writing Air, which, when you listen to it, it is basically a classical piece on guitar. And then the other one is one of my personal favorites on the album, which is 11 Blue Egyptians, which is a very funny name. But 11 Blue Egyptians is really cool because it takes the structure of a blues song, right? And it mixes in Jason's trademark shred in various parts, and then at the end actually brings it all together into this weird bluesy shred thing, which is really awesome. It's like it's blues, but there's like all these crazy like shred guitar things going on, and it's a really awesome song. So those are the ones that stand out. For pure shred factor, I think the most crazy song on the album is probably "Perpetual Burn," which is the title of that record. "Perpetual Burn" is the title of the record. And that's an incredibly difficult song to play. It uses a lot of these really weird. The main riff is this bizarre dive bomb tremolo sweep pick thing. So what he's doing, I think, and I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure this is what he's doing. Is I think he's grabbing on with the back couple of fingers to the tremolo bar. And as he's diving down, he's doing, that sort of sweep picking motion that you do, which, that is kind of, he gets this really strange sort of, it has a very strange, unique sound. And that sort of forms the bass riff for that song. So that just right off the bat kind of gives you an idea of how nuts it is. That one also incorporates a lot of different techniques, tapping, multiple string tapping, and just a lot of really unusual stuff. So with this opening part, the opening part of the song has a lot of sort of emotional playing and bends. And Tina is really able to convey a lot of emotion through some of those really great bends, and her use of like this of the very wide vibrato that Becker uses kind of throughout the whole song. It's not a technically perfect cover. I don't know that such a thing exists. I've seen probably 10 or 20 different covers. I think there's a gentleman on YouTube named Gus Drax, I think, that did probably the most technically perfect one, which is still not perfect. But the thing that I like about this one is it's something that should be so difficult for somebody so young, and she's still able to capture the emotion of it. It's way better than it has any right to be for somebody who's so young. My friend CrankyCanuck, who passed away, was really, I think, mostly impressed with her command of the instrument, but her ability to play with feeling, when required, which is just such a difficult thing, really, to teach somebody. I don't know that you can even teach it. It's sort of an instinct, and that's kind of the neat thing about this. The first part of the intro utilizes some interesting pitch bending stuff with the tremolo bar during the phrases. So you notice that as she's picking the notes, she's got the tremolo, which is sort of what I mentioned about that opening riff for Perpetual Burn, except it's just single notes instead of a sweep pick, run that she's using the whammy bar to give that sort of weird pitch bending effect to. And then, like I said, it's a lot of precision bends and vibrato, and Jason really was able to bring a lot of emotion out of these bends in these songs, and like that first minute, I would say the first minute and 15 minutes and 20 seconds, just has so many beautiful melodies in it, including the one that sort of is the basis for the song. You'll hear it come back again at the end. And it's there's some variations of it used during the middle part of the song where it gets a little bit crazier. But that melody actually is used kind of all throughout the song. The part at about 1:15 actually is normally played with no distortion. It's on the album. If you listen to it, it's I don't know that it's necessarily acoustic, but it's an electric guitar with no distortion on it. Now, obviously, if you're doing a cover, unless you're in a studio, it's kind of difficult to do things like that unless you swap guitars and stuff like that. So what Tina did that was really smart is she played that part very soft in terms of her picking and stuff like that to kind of give some dynamics to it, and so the attack wasn't as aggressive. So like, because you'll notice in the later parts where it's the really crazy like full fretboard sweeps, you're necessarily attacking the strings pretty heavily. She was using a much softer touch here, which was really really smart on her part, and it's one of the things I was talking about that's so great for somebody so young to have that sort of instinct when it comes to playing and voicing this sort of stuff. Um, the section that leads up to the first sweep picking section, it has a lot of very sort of vocal like phrasing to it. Like, if you're listening to it, the song doesn't really need vocals because the guitar is quite literally talking, in some of these sections. And a lot of that he is achieved by using the pitch bending I was talking about, where it makes it almost sound like it's a vocal note as opposed to just a pick note. So it's and again he uses that at the beginning here and then at the end again. And then at 145 it goes into the sort of the more shred part of the song, which is it starts off with this like really really fast ultra technical sweep picking section, and it's important to really note that at this time in 1988 no one was playing like this. You had Yngwie Malmsteen, who was doing a lot of sweep picking and stuff, but really only sweep picking. This crazy incorporation of multiple techniques is something that made Jason Becker. I mean, most people consider him to be one of the greatest of all time, even though he only put out one record. And it's because not just of this, he did do two albums with Marty Friedman from Megadeth in a band called Cacophony, and I think a lot of it is the mixture of both of those things. But both of those showed the level of maturity in the songwriting for a guy who was so young, and was just incredibly talented, and was doing things with the instrument and pushing boundaries in that sort of space of technical guitar playing. It was almost, I would say, it's in some ways it's almost akin to what Stevie Ray Vaughan was doing at around that same time with blues guitar, because Vaughan was pushing the boundaries of what people thought was blues. And it's really interesting if you watch his Live at the Montreux DVD, which is a 2 DVD set of 2 different years. The first year he was there, he got nearly booed off the stage because people just did not understand what they were seeing. This jazz festival crowd had no idea what they were witnessing. Come back in 1991, I think it was 91. I want to say it was 82 and 91, but it might have been, my dates might be wrong. But the second time he came back, he was a hero. He was like a legend. And it's just really goes, and it was playing the same stuff, but it just goes to show that, people who are pushing the boundaries, what they can really achieve, it's really only limited by, what they're able to come up with. And, when you look at somebody like, Jason Becker or Stevie Ray Vaughan, they're trying new things to push these boundaries out beyond what people have experienced. So, thought that was really cool. And this was, I would say at the time it came out, this was far beyond, pun not intended, what even somebody like Malmsteen was doing, because he was regarded, I think, and maybe a little bit unfairly as a one-trick pony. he was the sweep picking guy, you know, and which and that's unfair because he was a lot more than that. He has a lot more, but the one he was criticized a little bit, and I think this is a little bit fair for not really utilizing some of the other techniques that are available to a guitar player. There's not as much legato playing. There's almost no tapping. He doesn't do much tapping at all. Part of it is because he used a very unusual guitar setup. He played a Strat for one thing, which is not necessarily the best, but he really couldn't do a lot of tapping because his guitar was scalloped from the 13th fret, I believe, down to the 22nd fret, or 21, because I guess it was a Strats, either I think 21. But anyways, so it was scalloped from like about the halfway point down, and if your fretboard is scalloped, you really can't tap. I mean, you can, but it's very difficult to do so. It does make it easier to sweep pick though, because your finger movement across strings is a lot less impeded on a. I personally could never play on a scalloped fretboard because you don't feel as much contact with your finger, and I don't know that I would be able to. I think I'd have a tough time with it. Maybe if I got used to it. But I can see how somebody who is used to it would be able to move around the fretboard a lot quicker. And so when it comes to sweep picking, that's what it's all about. So so I think that was one of the reasons why, and he got labeled, I think a little bit unfairly. If you look at the way Tina's playing in that song, her right hand movement is incredible. I mean, it's picture perfect. It's she has almost a circular motion to her sweep picking, which like when you're doing those really fast sections like that, it allows for more economy of movement, and that's what playing guitar incredibly fast and technical is all about. It's about economy of movement. So if you've ever, there's a really great, if you're a guitar player, I highly recommend John Petrucci's Rock Discipline video, if you can find it, because he talks a ton about economy of motion when you're playing guitar, and especially for somebody like me who has small fingers, small hands, you don't have the advantage that a guy like Buckethead has. I mean, Buckethead's hand is like 2 times the size of my hand, so he can cover a lot more space a lot more easily. But when you have a smaller hand or smaller fingers, you need to be able to have more economy of motion, and that's really just making smart choices about how you finger things, and that's one of the ways that comes into play is your hand motion on your picking hand. So especially with sweep picking, it's really important. This part of your palm, right, is integral to sweep picking because it's what keeps all the strings from sounding like a mess when you're playing. Because for people who don't know what sweep picking is, it's called that because of that sort of a sweeping motion with your hand that you kind of notice her doing. But it's an arpeggio, so it's one note per string, right? So the difficulty is if you're moving extremely fast, one note per string all the way down, how do you keep it from sounding like a chord? So the way that you do that is by muting the strings below the string you're playing with this part of your hand. So that's how that's done. But you have to be careful because you don't want to mute it too much because then it's like thump, 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 thump. So there's a real art to it, and that's what makes it such a difficult technique. It's one of those things where once you figure out how to do it, it seems like it's really almost a second nature thing. But it's that initial, hump of getting over the hill of how to master the technique that I think is difficult for a lot of guitar players. And interspersed throughout here, and this is what makes Jason so great, is there's all kinds of different techniques being used here. There's a lot of very fast alternate picking being used. Um, there's a lot of bends and vibrato. Not maybe so much in the middle. There's a little bit, but not too much. But there definitely is use of the tremolo bar all throughout there. There's a lot of legato playing, which is simply legato is basically just hammer-ons and pulls off, or hammering on and pulling off, really without picking a note. So it gives you a much softer, very fluid feel to the voicing. So that's one of the things that I think is really good about Jason's playing. He does a lot of that. And all throughout, the thing that's really great is Tina's playing is extremely clear, extremely articulate. And I think around the 2 minute mark, if you go back and look, there's a really great example of some ultra clean legato playing from her. And it's a good example of what that sort of sounds like, and that sort of smoothness that you get from that type of playing. At 241, before the tapping section, there's some more really deep bends and really great vibrato stuff, and then we have the tapping section, but before he does that, he's doing more of those sort of pick notes with the vibrato or with the tremolo arm. The tapping section I love so much. It's nothing super difficult. So if you're comfortable with tapping, like I'm fairly comfortable with tapping, right? So this is a section that I can actually play fairly easily. It's just everything else in the song that's a real challenge for me. But the tapping section here is a beautiful melody, but it's fairly simplistic. It's really only about 6 or 7 different position changes, and it's 2 strings. So it's not something incredibly difficult. It's not like some crazy tapped arpeggio or something like that. It's not something like what you would hear from like Scale to Summit, where you're tapping multiple strings at the same time or anything like that. It's very straightforward, but it's beautiful and it sounds so nice. And I like the fact that he kept it fairly simple. And I think he tends to really with his tapping, because I think at that point in time, at that particular time, if you were doing guitar tapping, everyone was like, "Oh, you're just a clone of Eddie Van Halen," because that was what Eddie Van Halen was known for, right? And like, if you listen to Eruption, that's like kind of the quintessential guitar tapping piece, right? I just really like this section because of how smooth it sounds. And then when we come out of that section at 3:30, there's this section with a ton of like massive bends, and then there's there like at around 4:15, there's some more crazy sweep picking runs. These ones are really massive. Picking runs. They're like full fretboard sweeps. Very, very fast. And then that sort of brings us back to the main melody of the song. And there's a lot more of those huge bends, right? And I don't think people don't understand. Bending is not something that is really, it sounds easy. You take a note and you bend it up to pitch, right? It's not that simple, because unless you have an incredible ear, you may know where you're supposed to bend it. Okay, so I'm supposed to take this note, say this note is, and then go up one whole step or a half a step. A full step bend is a pretty huge bend. So, that sounds great on paper. It's fairly easy, fairly straightforward thing to say. But actually doing it is incredibly difficult, because you have to be very precise. If you are off by a little bit, it sounds bad. So bending is one of the tougher things, really. If there's a song with a ton of bends, it makes it very difficult to play it. And the same thing can be true of slides. So Becker uses both of those in this song. This, like I said, there's really not a technique this song does not have, except for like chord tapping, which is something that I don't think really existed until like kind of the early '90s maybe, was when you first started to hear that kind of thing being done. But it's really more of a recent development that it's become more common, that sort of tapping technique. But yeah, those full step bends are crazy, and there's a very wide, exaggerated vibrato. Again, that's another thing that can be tricky to pull off, right? You don't want to be going too crazy with your vibrato, because then it's going to sound out of tune. Plus, it can actually put your guitar out of tune. At one point in the song, early on, there's actually a neck bend, but it's not a really crazy one. Neck bends are something I never would recommend for somebody to do, because it can mess with the intonation on your guitar. It was a trick that EVH used to use quite a bit, but it's risky, because you don't want to fuck up the intonation on your guitar, because unless you're a guitar tech, it can be difficult to fix it. So not something I would recommend for for people to really try, unless you're comfortable with it. But yeah, when you put all this together, you really have this remarkable song that is a very complex piece, but also a very deeply emotional piece as well. It's beautiful to listen to, and aside from the association we have with this video, I think it's a fitting tribute for a fallen friend. So that's pretty much it. I managed to get through this video without losing it too much. So that's a victory, I guess. Yeah, we miss you, CrankyCanuck. So maybe tonight I'll be doing another video. I'm not sure. Probably it's one of the songs with vocals, because I do have another instrumental this week, but I'd rather not do two instrumentals in the same day. So maybe either the Orphan Land song or the Quo Vadis song. I think the Quo Vadis song might be a little bit easier for me to do, because it's a reaction, so I might go that route. But yeah. Have a good one, guys. Stay metal. Be good to each other.